I'm here because I believe that the environmental movement and the work we do to address climate change is undeniably connected and dependent on our ability to shift education systems and engage our youth in leadership to address violence and poverty. You see, I grew up between two worlds. For one, I lived in a small suburban town in New Jersey. Our house was the final house in a cul-de-sac. It sat on a dead end. Where the road stopped, a large field began. It was about 200 acres. Many months they would plant corn, but sometimes they would just keep it barren. As a child, it was the extension to my yard. As my legs got longer and my curiosity became more fearless, I would venture deeper into the field. In the middle of it, almost ceremoniously, stood 5 trees. They were wrapped around each other. They kind of grew into each other. And I called them my magic trees. And it was my own magical oasis. And I would tell my friends that there was a hole inside one of them. And if we climbed deep enough into it, we would find ourselves on the other side of the world. All the way in the back of the field began a small forest. There I would stumble upon small streams where I would play with tadpoles and frogs. In this natural landscape, my imagination would flourish. As I roamed, I discovered small fossils, flowers, animals. I listened to birds. I would stare at pensive deer. Perhaps my imagination about magic trees wasn't unwarranted. In many ways, in reality, I was being teleported to another part of the world. A bustling, chaotic, frantic, sensory kaleidoscope of a place called Bombay, India. Some of you may know of it as Mumbai. Bombay and Mumbai was my second home. It is a suffocating metropolis, a place where I would learn to live with the bare necessities. I remember that in the apartment flat where I would stay, there was only running water for about 2 hours in the morning. And then during the day, we'd be lucky if the electricity would turn on. I remember one evening watching my grandfather as he would masterfully eat his food with his fingers. He ate out of a thali, which is a steel plate with this round lip of an edge around it. It's like a flat bowl. And he would mix together rice and dal and use his hands to scoop it into his mouth. He would, at the end of his meal, make sure that every grain of rice found its way into his stomach. At the end of his meal, he would pour water into the thali, and he would mix it and scrub it around the plate. And then he would lift the plate up to his mouth, and he would drink the water. That's how he cleaned the dishes. Not one grain of rice was wasted, not one drop of water. In Mumbai, I was shaped by witnessing deep, global, unindustrialized world poverty. And when I came home to New Jersey, I would bear witness to the stark contrast between the two worlds. I remember in New Jersey opening the refrigerator and having multiple fat percentage grades of milk. I remember some different ice creams, a few cereal boxes and juices. And when I would go to school on the first day, I was baffled when I would see plates filled with food thrown into the trash. Chicken nuggets, half-eaten slices of pizza, plates of French fries and uneaten oranges, uneaten apples, all of it just straight into the trash. I was 8, 9 years old. The amount of food I saw wasted and thrown away, I thought to myself, could have just fed an entire village in India. Those who are concerned about environmental sustainability and climate change cannot deny the important link between how food waste that ends up in landfills produces huge amounts of methane, a more powerful greenhouse gas than even carbon dioxide. Excess amounts of greenhouse gases such as methane and carbon dioxide absorb infrared radiation and heat up the Earth's atmosphere, causing global warming and climate change. More than 30% of available food in America is tossed into the trash. For you all here in Chicago, that's enough to fill your Sears Tower 44 times. Fill that building 44 times, and that's how much food we throw in the trash every year in America. And yet, for some reason, we still have children in America going to school without breakfast and going to bed hungry. With agriculture accounting for 70% of the water used throughout the world, food waste also represents a great waste of fresh water resources. By throwing out 1 kilogram of beef, you are essentially wasting 50,000 liters of water. In the same way, nearly 1,000 liters of water for 1 glass of milk put down the drain. We would make great strides towards environmental sustainability if we dismantled the capitalist systems and culture that are barriers to food reaching the mouths of hungry women, men, and children around the world. Instead, we allow families to suffer from hunger and opt to allow food to rot away in landfills by distributing food that otherwise will be wasted to those who are living in poverty. We are simultaneously reducing methane gases and reducing hunger. As a young boy, my questions around why there was poverty, why I could have 3 pairs of shoes at home, and why so many of the children who I was surrounded by had no shoes at all, these questions plagued my thirsty mind. These thoughts kept me awake at night. I never did, nor do I even today understand why the world has to be so unequal, so inequitable, why there is such a vast difference between the rich and the poor. By the time I went to college, I had seen a lot, but I also was very raw and unsure about where and in which world I actually fit in. After my sophomore year of college, I left school. My life was inundated with alcohol and drugs. My focus was off, my friend circle was falling apart, and I felt stuck. I decided to join a program called AmeriCorps, and for the next year I lived in Berry Farms, a neighborhood in southeast Washington, D.C. It's characterized by epidemic rates of violence and government-subsidized housing. It was here that I was positioned to be a mentor to 3rd and 4th graders. I learned about community organizing while starting the first garden back behind the school. Here, the kids I worked with probably did not know it, but they were about to change and influence my life more than I may have their own. On one summer day, as I walked to the school from my neighborhood apartment, I noticed police lines blocking the adjacent block. I couldn't see across the crowd, and after a few minutes, I kept moving and I went to my classroom. When I got to the room, my 8- and 9-year-old students were frantic, scared, and nervous. They were talking fast. I decided we may as well have a conversation about this. I'm not sure how I can focus on math and English in this moment. So as we were talking, one of the girls began to relay that she actually saw what happened. And she said there was someone hanging dead from the tree. I wasn't trained in this kind of dialogue on trauma yet. All I could do was listen and try to assure the kids that they were safe now in the school with me. The weeks continued, and soon later, one of my students, D'Artagnan's father, was murdered. It was in a back alley. He actually didn't come to school that day, D'Artagnan, But the next, when I was leaving school, while walking through the neighborhood, I saw him playing in the streets with his friends. He was shooting water guns in the humid, hot DC heat. The way he was moving and talking, it almost seemed like nothing had just happened. He was 9 years old. As the summer months passed and waned, I spent more time trying to resolve conflicts and break up fights than anything else. Most of my kids were traumatized, not only by the violence that surrounded them in their communities, but also by their inability to pass standardized tests. These tests would determine their intelligence and their moving into the next grade. By the time many of my kids were 8 years old, they had already deemed themselves stupid, worthless, and unintelligent. The tests and scoring made them feel hopeless. If you are 8 years old and you keep failing a test over and over and over again, or you get a D and an F, of course you might start thinking you're not that smart. What a tragedy, especially when you're trying your hardest. Back then, I didn't know how I could teach math or English when my youth needed first to find self-worth, to feel valued, appreciated, and cultivate the skills to have healthy relationships, which would then bring meaning to their lives. My kids were learning violence every day. And the same education system that was meant to inspire them instead violently cast them away as not good enough. I knew in that moment that if kids can learn violence, as we do through our music and television and films, as we do by watching learned behavior in our homes, then children can also be taught kindness, compassion, empathy, dignity, self-worth, and peace.